Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and this is an episode that is long overdue. We have never talked about today's episode here in Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast history, over 600 episodes, and finally we're talking about something that, whether we realize it or not, affects our mood, affects our productivity, affects our ability to get stuff done in our lives and in our businesses, and we're joined by an incredible guest to talk about all these things with us. Her name is Monica Hyde. She is the owner of Tidy Archival, which is a professional organizing business that combines organization and coaching techniques to create a unique spin on organizing, designing, and digitizing for the home, work, and life. Monica is a huge proponent to keeping a tidy lifestyle to maintain a positive atmosphere and energy throughout each and every day. She's been organizing her lifestyle since a young age and loves to get others enthusiastic about cleaning, condensing, and organizing belongings. I'll be the first to admit here publicly on the air, I totally need Monica's advice, so I'm excited to dive in with her today. Monica holds a Master of Arts in Museum Studies from Syracuse University, where she concentrated on digitization processes and collection management. Aside from being a professional organizer, this is going to make sense to you. Monica is a museum and library advocate, conservationist, photographer, interior designer, bookworm, gamer, and a tea and coffee enthusiast. I'm so excited to dive into so much good stuff here with Monica. So let's dive straight into my interview today with Monica Hyde. All right, Monica, as you could tell, I'm already excited, even just from reading your bio. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Heck yeah. And as I said in the intro, obviously this stuff really does, whether we realize it or not. I think that's an important angle for every listener here today, is that this stuff is impacting us. So walk us through, how did you get into this stuff, especially at a young age?
Well, it kind of stemmed from my upbringing. My parents are both, unfortunately, pack rats. So they have a lot of items, a lot of things, and it just caused a lot of clutter throughout the house. And so I was the complete opposite growing up. I'm like, I need everything to be neat and tidy. And so I just kind of rolled with it. I continued to do that throughout my life and eventually got here to starting my business.
Yeah, I love that. I especially love how you've taken it and you've realized this is something that not everybody is great at, and you've turned it into a business where you help others. Let's get to the root of it though. Why does this stuff even matter? Especially, I love that, and it's all over your business. We'll talk about your business later on in today's session, but you make it clear this affects not just your life, but also your business. Why is this so important?
It's something that I find really is helpful for both myself and for others to be organized on both like your work ethics, your day-to-day lifestyle. And if you have that kind of squared away, then the rest of the day kind of rolls a lot more easily, and you just function a lot better knowing that, oh, this is clean, it's tidy, I don't have to worry about it, it's all good.
Yeah, and it makes sense because fundamentally we understand it from a productivity perspective. You know, every guru out there on productivity tells us if you want to make tomorrow the most productive it can possibly be, tonight, get organized, come up with your list, do all of that. But we often overlook our physical spaces. What are some of those things? So when you and I talk about us not being organized in life, which affects our work, which affects our spaces, what are some of those things? Clutter is kind of a broad word. Are we talking about having clothes all over the place? Are we talking about having too many belongings? What's the scope of this stuff?
I mean, it kind of entails a lot of that. I mean, clutter can be just paper. It could be, I have too many clothes. They're all over the place. I don't know what to wear. So it encapsulates a lot of different things. And I find that if you operate within more of like a minimalist lifestyle, it's a lot easier to function from day to day than it is to have just stuff just to have it. So if it has meaning to you, then, and it's used daily, then it makes more sense.
Yeah, you're definitely preaching to the choir here, Monica, because part of the one thing that I bragged about all throughout my 20s, now that I'm a little bit older, I'm in my 30s, I'm a little bit more settled down, so I have furniture now, but in my 20s, you said my favorite word, minimalist. I bragged to everybody that my entire life, if I wanted to fit it in my car, I could, and that's why it was so easy for me to move from coast to coast, for example, when I moved to Los Angeles. And so I relate to that. It is that air of freedom. It is that ability to say, hey, I can be versatile. I can be dynamic in whatever I want because I'm not tied down by things. And I know that we're talking about things right now, but there's so many different philosophies and strategies behind your work. Obviously, Marie Kondo, I feel like you could talk about this way better than I can. She changed the game a few years ago. When her TV show came out, all of a sudden we started thinking about this. Talk to us about the success from your perspective of Marie Kondo, why it resonated on a societal level, and then talk to us about what her approach is like. And then also, I know that you incorporate not only her stuff, but so many different approaches. Walk us through this new world to us.
For sure. So I really love Marie Kondo. She is like my go-to organizational idol. I have all of her books. She's written, I think, 3 now. And she goes at organizing from the top down, and she really makes you focus on each and every individual item and really understand, does this item bring me joy? If it doesn't, then I need to get rid of it. And that's kind of her whole motto is, does it bring me joy? And if it doesn't, it needs to go.
Yeah, so I want you to expand on that a little bit, because that's a fascinating question, a fundamental question that we don't ask ourselves enough about our stuff. But what is it about her approach? You're an avid fan. You've already said that. You've read her books. Her TV show really caught on to mainstream appeal. I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the first time this type of conversation got into the mainstream. What is it about, whether it's the time where she started catching on in society or the actual nature of it itself? Did we just start amassing too much stuff in this country in particular? What is it that you think brought it to mainstream appeal?
I think she brought about the idea of minimalism, because in Eastern cultures, they have very, very small, compact apartments and living, and they live in a more minimalistic lifestyle. They only have what they need or things that bring them joy. They're not just having stuff just to have stuff. And growing up in the United States, we were taught, like, you just need more and more things. We're in a very maximalistic type lifestyle in the US. And so she brought this concept from her culture, and introduced it to the United States and other countries as well, because her things are nationwide. And it's so fascinating how she breaks everything down and makes it more manageable. And it just blows my mind. I could talk about it for hours, but I love her, and the way that she tackles minimalism is just, it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I love hearing that, Monica, especially one point that you just raised that I hadn't initially thought about, but obviously we're all listening to this episode through our own lenses, through our own lives, and through our own belongings. And so for me, hearing you talk about those cultural differences between traditional Eastern culture and traditional Western culture, you're right. Space is one of those big differences. And I can think of, for example, when I lived in Los Angeles, I had a little bit of a smaller place. I'm back here on the East Coast now with a bit more room. And it's funny because when I was in my smaller place in LA, I had less stuff, Monica. It's almost as if we like to fill the spaces. Talk to us about that and what you've seen, whether you want to use examples from real life projects or some of the strategies that you roll out. What is it about us in filling spaces?
I think it's just because we have most of our areas in the United States, at least from like apartment to home perspective, it's a large area, and we were always taught, oh, if this has space, I need to fill it with something. Something needs to be there instead of having it just be blank, empty space to let your eyes rest. And so I've kind of done that myself when I've moved from apartment to apartment. I'm like, okay, I need to weed stuff down and have that moment of rest so that I can breathe. And it's actually a lot more eye-opening of an experience than you would think when you have a place to kind of, oh, I can breathe. There's just empty space, even though it's kind of daunting in a way, because we're taught we got to fill that space. And now I've noticed with just my own lifestyle, I've been doing more of that minimalist and having that area where I can just rest and not have it be cluttered with anything. And it makes so much of a difference.
Yeah, Monica, I have to ask you this because I'm fascinated by your approach and I want to talk for sure. There's one question, listeners know there are no pre-planned questions on this show, but there's one question that before we hit record today, I was like, I have to ask Monica about this, but I'm going to wait to get there because listeners also know that one of my words of the year is intention. And I'm not going to lie to you, Monica. If we had to on the fly here, use me as a bad example for listeners, the one area that I know I'm not great at is mail. Monica, mail is the one thing that piles up for me, whether it be magazines or junk mail or heck, even mail that I get from past people who lived at my address. I'm just like, I don't need this stuff. But for one reason or another, I bring it from my mailbox into my place. So mail is the one thing that adds up. And I would imagine that part of your work, the first step is that intentionality. Hey, let's first be aware of what's going on so then we can start to fix it. Talk to us about how do we even figure out where to start? For me, obviously, I'm picking on mail, but for others, they're probably sitting there thinking, yeah, my whole life feels unorganized. I don't even know where to begin. What is that first step in this process?
I actually just created a checklist of like going through and figuring out where you need to start on your organizational journey in 10 steps. And my first step is setting goals. Like, where are your problem areas? Where would you like to start? And start there. Don't think about like the overall project yet. Just think about, okay, I have this junk drawer, because everybody has a junk drawer. I have this junk drawer and I need to organize it in some way because it's driving me absolutely crazy. I can never find anything, and anything and everything just ends up in this junk drawer. And if you set a goal, I want to organize this junk drawer and have it completed in 1 month. If you set that intention, it's a lot easier to get to that end goal than it is to just be like, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it.
Yeah, I like that answer because it's something that I talk about so much within the scope of entrepreneurship is that whatever you choose to focus on for the next 30, 60, 90 days, you will accomplish. If you want to get your first customer or client in the next 30, 60, 90 days, and it's all you focus on, 100% you'll be able to do it. So I love that intentionality is behind your process. And here's the one question that I was like, I need to ask Monica this today because now we're starting to talk about strategies, and I'm excited for that checklist, by the way. We have to come back to that so listeners know where to get their hands on that. But the one thing that really excites me is as I was reading through your website about what your company does and how you operate, you wrote that your business combines organizing ideas from Marie Kondo, who we talked about, the home edit, And here's the big one, Monica, the art of Swedish death cleaning. Walk us through what the heck these strategies and approaches are.
Sure. So the home edit, I actually just found them, I think it was during the pandemic when I kind of like sat down and really got into their TV show on Netflix. And oh my gosh, they are just the two most energetic balls of fun. They're two ladies, they live in Tennessee, and they operate more kind of like with a more maximalist lifestyle, but they are all about the rainbows. They try to color code everything, and it just makes me so happy because I'm like, oh, this is great. I love color coding everything, and it really resonated with me. So I like to use their different techniques that they have introduced. They have different workbooks, they have calendars and different things to that nature that are really helpful in the organizational process. And then the other item, The Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, it's actually a book, and I highly recommend people read it. It's very, very short. It's like less than an inch thin. So it's basically the author goes through her way of going through her items before preparing for when she dies. And she really hits those key points of, are these items sentimental just to me, or are they going to be sentimental to anybody else? And she really narrows it down to, I'm going to label everything and be like, this is keep, this is get rid of, and here's my one little box of keepsakes that I'm going to hold on to, and it's just for me. It's not for anybody else. And people can do what they want with it when I'm gone, but this is what I want, and this is what brings me joy and happiness.
Yeah, I love that overview because, Monica, it seems like so many of your answers really come back to, I'm just going to keep harping on it because it is one of my words of the year, but it is that intentionality. It's not that I'm keeping this thing because it's there and it's a thing that I own and I acquired it on some trip or just last time I was at Target, but it really is that question of, you brought it up within the context of Marie Kondo. Is this something that brings me joy? You've brought it up now here, which is this something that is meaningful to me and adds to my life? I love the intentionality behind that. And it's funny for me because I feel like this is only half of the equation of what you do, Monica, because I know that the other half is, even more broadly speaking, not just things, is designing actual spaces, looking at the context of, hey, how is your space physically set up? And I feel like it's actually, you brought up the pandemic, it's probably more relevant now post-pandemic than it was before the pandemic because more and more people are working from home. Talk to us about space design, interior designing, how that plays into the type of work that you do.
Yeah, for interior, I mean, I've always been enthusiastic about interior design, and it's always been a passion of mine, especially with my museum background. You have to think about the space as a whole, and you have to think about the flow. How are people going to walk into the space? What is the space going to be used for? What's your intention behind the space? And then think about those items and then set about what you want to do within that space. And I do that a lot with my own space. I'm like, okay, what is this space going to be used for mainly? And for like a living room, I just want an area where I can crash, but it still be functional day to day, and it still looks neat, it still looks tidy, and I don't have to do a lot of cleaning up all the time, but it's some place that's still cozy and I can still be very relaxed in. And I've actually just introduced using a new software program, and it uses a technique that is kind of used within the museum field for archaeology, and it's a LiDAR, that's the name of it, system, and you can scan the room, and then it creates this 3D rendering of the space, and then you can go in and you can manipulate the space as you see fit. You can move things around, you can add things, you can delete things, and it makes the interior designing process and organizing process a lot more easier, especially because if people aren't that visually adept, then they can physically see, oh, there's my space. Oh, that's really neat. I can now kind of see where you're getting these ideas and where things will go in the long run. And it makes more sense to people.
Yeah, Monica, now you raised one of my favorite words in the entire world, which is process. We love automating and systematizing things, not only in our businesses, but in our lives. And that's something that you're talking about right now. And it's something that as you're describing this process, I'm physically picturing you. Obviously, you and I are on video. We can see each other right now, but I'm picturing you in my place and just organizing things and saying, Brian, this doesn't belong here. This doesn't belong here. This isn't tidy. And a large part of me, as I'm picturing that, is thinking, well, let's say you make it tidy today. Who's to say it's still going to be tidy tomorrow? Because I know that whether let's say I take out some food to eat it, or I am going through that dreaded mail of mine, all of these things are going to untidy my place. What are some of your tips, or if you have those processes for us, what are some of those tips or strategies for us to always keep our place clean? Because I think the easiest way to keep a place clean is to keep it clean, not let it go overboard. But talk to us about some tips and strategies there.
I always start with telling people, it wouldn't be as hard to keep a place tidy if you didn't have as many things. So I really try to push people to live and breathe that more minimalist lifestyle. Only hold on to what brings you joy. What do you use on the daily? If you haven't, here's a major trick that I use. If you haven't used it within a year, it needs to go. And so you need to let those items that you don't use, or you only use like once a year, it probably can be let go. And then with that idea, when you don't have as many things, you don't have to worry as much about that tidying aspect. But in regards to like everyday spaces like your kitchen, after you're done cooking, if you do it right away, I find that it's a lot easier to keep your spaces tidy than be like, oh, I'm just going to do it later. And you push that back, and then that later becomes a couple hours, a couple days, a couple months. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, why didn't I just do that right away? And that's where you need to start thinking with that tidy aspect of, I'm going to do it right now while I'm thinking about it. And then it'll get you in that mindset. It'll get those gears going of, okay, I'm just going to continue doing this. And then it becomes automatic and not, oh, I got to do this all the time.
Yeah, listeners, I'm sure that Monica is putting all of us on the spot right here, right now, by pointing out that procrastination that we might have in the kitchen. It's the exact same procrastination feeling that we feel in our businesses. Don't put off for later what could and should be done right now. I love that advice, Monica. And you know what? Thinking back to childhood, it's funny. In Monica, I'm not sure if I feel like we're somewhat within the same generation. And thinking back to childhood of elementary school, for example, there's only one organizational system that I can ever recall being taught in school, and that is the Dewey Decimal System. And that's why I feel like libraries and museums particularly are kind of a shining example of organization. I don't know if Dewey Decimal is still around in libraries, but talk us through, because you are an aficionado for museums and libraries as well. What are some of those organizational principles that we can apply into our own lives and businesses?
libraries still use Dewey Decimal. They only use it in the nonfiction section, so I will. It's not an archaic idea. But yeah, the museums and libraries both use a pneumatic system in order to manage their collections. And in that sense, I kind of use that idea in my day-to-day tasks or having my spaces be organized. For example, I have a book collection, which probably doesn't come as a surprise since I am a library advocate and I used to be a librarian. So I have my own collection of books, and I actually keep and manage those items to the extent of, okay, I don't need duplicates of these, or this item is, I've read it a bunch of times and I want to pass it on to somebody else who can love that item just as much as I did. And it feels so good to pass those items along to people that may need it at the time, or it's something that will give them inspiration down the road. And I think having that intentionality and just thinking about not just yourself and not just your things, of everybody else around you and how it's going to affect them in the long run. And that's why I go back to the art of Swedish death cleaning, is when you eventually leave this planet, what's going to happen to your things? And if you think in that sense, and even though it is a kind of a little bit morbid, but if you think it in that way, it's a lot easier to manage your items and think, oh, well, this only has meaning to me, so I guess I can let it go. Or even if it does have a little bit of meaning to you, sometimes just taking a photograph, and we have our phones and digital items that we can do that now, just taking a photograph of that item, and then you can save that picture anywhere and have it for oodles of time, whereas that item may not last down the road. And that's why museums and libraries are both pushing more towards that digital aspect, and we need to start thinking about that digital aspect as well and start moving towards that transition of, okay, we're going to go from physical to digital.
Yeah, Monica, that is a natural transition, because I feel like it kind of is the last frontier when it comes to what people focus on with regards to tidying. We're really good at or some of us are really good at donating clothes when we're done with them, stuff like that. But the one thing, I'm going to call my parents out right here. A few years ago for Christmas, I bought them a digitization service. We have all of these childhood videos that's an example. When you talk about sentimental things, there's no way they ever want to get rid of those, but they take up a lot of space. They're also not accessible. None of us have any VHS players anymore, so we can't even play them. I haven't seen my childhood videos in like a decade now. And I want to talk to you about digitization, because I love the fact that that's something that you offer in your business. Why is that something that you feel it is essential when it comes to the scope of what we're talking about here today? And for people not only to capture those sentimental things, but also, it sounds like for you, archival. Like, that is, obviously it's in the name of your business, but it's something that you do on your bookshelf, but it's also something that you want to do with all of those memories that we have on film, on old photo books and photo albums. These photo albums from my childhood are massive. Talk to us about digitization and how that plays in.
Well, for digitization, I always get this question, what is it? And it's basically, the way that I explain it is, you're taking something that is physical, such as a photograph, and converting it into a digital format, because we know that things like records and VHSs are going out of style, and we are going to lose those ways of converting those materials from the format that it is now into a format that's usable, such as like an MP4, MP3, that kind of thing. And this is something that I really focused on during my studies for my master's degree, is that in museums, they have all these different items, and you have to think about, oh, this material, especially with like clothing, it's going to deteriorate down the road. If we don't preserve that item as it is now, we're going to lose it because of the environment that it's in, the different things that it's stored in. And you have to kind of think more of that broader aspect and the big picture. And so I want to offer people the opportunity to digitize their collections, like their photographs, because everybody has those picture albums, but do you have those photographs saved in a digital format so that other people can enjoy it? And you're not going to lose those physical pieces that are memories and you want to pass along to your kids and your grandkids and so on and so forth. So in that sense, that's it. It makes more sense to think about the process of digitization.
Yeah, Monica, I feel like that's going to be the push. And I'm glad that you took my question and you first backed up and said, well, let's talk about what digitization actually is. Because you're right. I feel like, I think about this because I'm younger than my parents' generation, but you're right. I think so many listeners, this will be their push to say, wait, hold on. Yeah, you're right. I don't have any digital copies of any of these things. So hopefully it is a big push for people to take action from here. And Monica, with regards to action, I know that there's so many different things that we talked about today. Time has flown by in this episode, so I always love to give my guests the hardest job of these episodes and ask you, what is that action that you think people should take? We talked about so many different things, from getting rid of belongings to tidying up your space to death cleaning, for example, which is a morbid topic, but I think there's so many fruitful things that come out of that. We talked about your interior design space. We talked about digitization, all of these things. What's one action, particularly speaking to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur audience, that you think everybody should take today to start organizing their life, their work, their home, all of that good stuff?
The first step in any organizational process is setting goals for yourself. Because if you set those goals and you write them down like on a physical calendar, and I know a lot of people don't have physical calendars, we just always go to our phones and put down a note, and it's out of sight, out of mind. So if you have that physical board or calendar on your refrigerator or someplace that's noticeable that you're going to see on the daily, and you write down, okay, I'm going to set my intention of, I'm going to clean this, I'm going to go through this particular space and have it finished by this date. And then you're going to see that date every single day as you go in and out of your space. And hopefully that intention, that goal, will push you towards organizing and getting your space clean.
Yeah, Monica, I feel like that is such suitable advice, because intentionality is one of those themes that's run through our entire conversation here today. So I love that. I know listeners are going to be super curious to check out all these things, especially digitalization. So at this point, I'd love to open the stage for you to brag on us, share those links, tell people where they can learn about you, Tidy Archival, and all the awesome stuff that you're up to.
Well, you can always visit my website. It's at www.tidyarchival.com. And I'm also on 2 social media platforms. I use Instagram, and it's at Tidy Archival. Very easy to find. And then I also use Pinterest. I have a business page, and I post on the daily different items that I use in the organizational process, and I'm hoping that that'll be helpful for people starting their journey and getting those ideas going of, this is what I can use to organize my space.
Yes, I love that. Listeners, you know the drill. You can find the links that Monica just shared with us down in the show notes, wherever it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Her business website is at tidyarchival.com. There's a lot of information. Her website is actually awesome. Click through to the About page. You'll read about her approach to all of these things, as well as her services, her pricing, her projects. All of those things are right there. So Monica, thank you so much for coming on today to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.